for coming to the 2022 Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame induction ceremony and reception. I welcome Bill Samuels Jr., Chairman Emeritus of Maker's Mark, a member of the inaugural 2001 class of the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame, and the 2017 recipient of the Parker Beam Lifetime Achievement Award, to introduce industry recipient Julian P. Van Winkle III, President of Old Rip Van Winkle Distillery.
It's an honor to be here today. It's an honor to be anywhere after reading yesterday's Courier Journal when we're states we only live till we're 72 and a half years old. It's very scary when you get my age. It really is. It's a special honor for me to be able to introduce Julian P. Van Winkle III for a much-deserved place in the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. After Julian's family sold the Stitzel-Weller Distillery, his father created the Old Rip Van Winkle brand. His father passed away in 1991. I knew him well, and in order for Julian to have control over bottling, he soon thereafter purchased the old Hoffman Distillery near Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. After he found the now famous photo of his grandfather in a basement file cabinet in the mid-1990s, the Pappy Van Winkle brand was created. The 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle brand scored a 99, the highest rating ever given by the Chicago Beverage Tasting Institute. Eventually, the 15 and 23-year-old Pappy Van Winkle labels were added to the Van Winkle portfolio. Julian was the very first to sell ultra-aged premium bourbon. And I might add, sell it pretty well. In 2002, Julian joined forces with Buffalo Trace Distillery, which continues to distill, age, and bottle the Van Winkle brands today. In January of 2009, Julian was honored to be nominated as a fellow at the Southern Foodways Alliance annual meeting at Blackberry Farms. In 2009, he became the first Kentuckian to receive the coveted James Beard Award. And in May of 2011, Julian won the prestigious Wine and Spirits Professional Award. Whiskey Magazine honored Julian in 2017, indicting him. No, I'm going to indict him in just a minute. The indictment part comes later. Inducting him into its Hall of Fame. Julian comes from a great bourbon family, which really not only includes he and his grandfather, but also his father Julian and his uncle King McClure. Each of these gentlemen, an industry giant that my family has known for well over 75 years. As a child, I remember how helpful they all were in helping my father get Maker's Mark started. It's one of those things you never forget. I also remember my first drink of bourbon as a 12-year-old while visiting Pappy in his Stitzel-Weller Distillery. Very illegal, Governor. Two fingers, 100 proof, old Fitz. I took a big gulp and thought I was going to die. I give you now a gentleman most worthy of this high honor, my friend Julian P. Van Winkle III.
You have a big sheet, I have a little tiny sheet, Andrea. Not very easy to follow you. Thank you, Bill, very much. I'll get back to you later. But I do want to say thank you to the KDA for having me and my family here. This is quite an honor. Just amazing that Bill Samuels and his family has surprisingly thought that I was worthy to be in this Hall of Fame, and I'm honored to be part of this great group here. And very proud of Andrea also, who we kind of toiled together back in the day, not knowing where this industry was going, but we stuck it out because it's the only thing we knew how to do, right? My dad always said, why don't you go apply for a banking job or an insurance job in case this bourbon thing doesn't work out. And I did. I got one bank interview, and that was about as far as I went with that. I didn't know the difference between a liability and an asset back then, because all I had was the liability part. But thanks to also, people always say, how did this bourbon thing, when did your brand start to take off? And I can't answer that. It's tiny little pieces of help along the way, and it's aligning yourself with good people that are a lot smarter than I am, a lot better at my business than I am, as far as giving you good guidance. And then you obviously have to have a good product, which really helps, because the ratings are one thing, but people will let you know if you don't have a really good product, and they'll let you know fast. So that was always been the easy part for us in our family. My sister Sally produced this book in 1999, But Always Find Bourbon, which really people would say, well, tell me about your business. I was handing Sally's book. It was great. But it got the whole history of our family, and a lot of different bourbon families in Kentucky were in the book and talked about them, and we are a family. It is an amazing thing. When I was toiling away down in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky at the old Commonwealth Distillery, which was the Hoffman Distillery before I bought it, the bottling equipment would break down, and Darlene, another big part of my life as far as Darlene Gillis from Lawrenceburg, who ran that place with me for 20-something years. She'd call Jimmy Russell, and he'd send a mechanic over to fix the bottling line. And thank God, or I'd still be down there, because I didn't have a clue. I could get to a certain point, and that was it. But people like that in the bourbon business, we're all family. The production side of it is incredibly close. You get to the marketing side, it gets a little bit cutthroat. So those guys are a little bit mean. They got to eat too, but it's a little bit different on that side, a little bit more competitive. But again, a lot of help, and very grateful that everybody helped me along. My family really helped me along too. Buffalo Trace knocked on my door in 2001 and asked me if I wanted to do a joint venture with them. At that point, I was buying whiskey mostly from Stutz-Weller, thanks to Andrea and Frenchie. But that supply was drying up because bourbon was becoming more popular. The vodka and the Frost 880 days were getting over with, thank goodness, so the bourbon was coming back up. And so I was buying aged whiskey, but I needed to have whiskey in a warehouse for the future. And Mark Brown knocked on my door and said, want to become a partner? And I said, well, I'm doing okay. And I thought about it for about 2 seconds. And because I needed to put some whiskey away for many, many years. My business plan is 23 years long. I wouldn't suggest doing that if anybody else wants to get in the bourbon business. And I've told a lot of people that, but they're not listening to me because there's a lot of people getting in the bourbon business. But it does take deep pockets, and Sazerac has really helped me along in their production. And the most important part about my partners is they produce really good whiskey. So we're very pleased with what they're doing. And the weeded recipe that our family has made all these years, 3, 4, maybe 5 generations someday, seems to be catching on, because I think there are a few other weeded bourbons out there in the market, which is an honor to my grandfather, who really promoted that back in the day. My daughters have taken the ball and run with it with their business, Pappy and Company. Thank God I got Preston out the day after he graduated from UK. The day after he graduated, he was dumping whiskey in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, helping me out. We doubled our employees that day, doubled our salary too, 2 of us. But thanks, he's really been there for me to when I can't be around, and he does all the things that if I'm not available to do, and he's learned it very well, and he's really been my right-hand man for 20 years, which I can't believe, but thank you, Preston, for taking care of things when I'm not around. basically being on the golf course, I guess, or doing some duck hunting or something. The Samuels are so important in our life, and it's our lives, and we this weekend in Louisville, the Bourbon and Beyond event is going on, and we're doing a little panel with the Browns, the Van Winkles, and the Samuels, just because we're all have these relations, family-wise and business-wise together. So it's really, it's so important to be in the Kentucky bourbon business, but it's very special because there are not many of us in family bourbon business from Kentucky. Before Prohibition, there were tons of them, but that took out a lot of them. But it's really important to me and our family to be in the Kentucky bourbon business and having a generational thing going. You know, Gen 1 going to Gen 2 is hard. That's probably the hardest one. We're trying to do Gen 3, Gen 4, Generation 5. You know, it's a tough thing, but we're going to make it happen because it has to survive, because there's too much history in our brand and our family and all the Kentucky bourbon families to not carry this thing on. So we're going to make this thing continue on, and damn with the vodka, damn with the tequila and the scotch and all that. Sorry, Damien, scotch, and I know you're back there, but it's really important to us to keep this thing going. So one person that's not been mentioned too much in the last 20, 30 years is my dad. He ran the business after Pappy died in 1965. He was in college, got out in 1937, worked for my father, joined the Army, went to the Pacific Theater, was wounded, tank commander, came home, got right back in the business. I'm going through his diary of 1944 and a lot of his letters to my mother, his wife, Katie, and his parents. And he mentions about 50% of the letters about the war were about Stitzelweller Distillery, the bourbon business, and the distributors who were giving him a hard time. So it was such a big part of him. But he kind of gets wafted over as far as thinking about what a job he did from the time Pappy passed away until we sold the distillery in 1972, because the old Fitzgerald brand was, obviously we're a little bit biased, but we think it was the best whiskey and still is the best bourbon on earth. Just look at the prices in an auction of an old Fitz bottle from the 50s or 60s. The quality's there. And I'm sorry I ever told anybody about that stuff. I should have kept my mouth shut, buying it on eBay for 20 bucks a bottle back in the day. But he was very important, and he kept that business as long as he could, putting whiskey away in a warehouse and not getting any income from it for years and years and years is not an easy thing to do. So obviously capital became a problem to keep the business going with all that whiskey in the warehouse, and the size of the distillery just couldn't keep up with the volume, so we had to sell. But we have a good, very wealthy partner right now, and things are going great. But my father and grandfather, really, they were born 60 years too early, really, because what we're doing now is selling aged, wheated Kentucky bourbon whiskey, and they had the deal back in the 50s and 60s, but it just wasn't, the rest of the world wasn't ready for it. So we're going to carry on with that, and Lord willing, we'll be around for a few more years. Thank you all for coming.
Weep no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for my old Kentucky home. For my old Kentucky home, far